In this movie, we're going to create this piece of op art entirely from scratch inside Photoshop. Naturally, the first thing that we need to do is create the window pattern. So go up to the File menu and choose the New command, and dial in a width value of 450 pixels and a height value of 400 pixels. Resolution doesn't matter. You want the color mode to be grayscale. The background content should be white. Then go ahead and click OK to create that file. Now, assuming that you've got your rectangular marquee tool selected here in the toolbox, go ahead and switch the style from normal up here in the options bar to fixed size and dial in a width value of 400 pixels and a height value of 200 pixels. And then go ahead and click in the upper left corner of the image in order to create this selection right there. So notice that it doesn't extend quite all the way over to the right-hand side, and that's going to allow us some space between the windows. Now tap the D key to make sure your foreground color is black and press Alt Backspace or Option Delete on the Mac in order to fill the selection with black, and then press Control D or Command D on the Mac to deselect the image. And you might as well go ahead and switch the style back to normal so that you can use the rectangular marquee tool normally in the future. Now go to the Edit menu and choose Define Pattern, and we'll go ahead and name this new pattern Windows, and then click OK. Now to create the actual file, press Control-N or Command-N on the Mac to bring up the new dialog box. This time we want the width value to be 4,800 pixels and the height value should be 3,000 pixels. That's just going to give us some predictable results. The resolution value, once again, doesn't matter. You want your color mode to be grayscale so that you don't end up with a ginormous file. And background contents of white is just fine. Then go ahead and click OK to create that file. Now let's create a new pattern layer by pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and clicking the little circular black-white icon at the bottom of the Layers panel, and then choose the Pattern command. And because you have the Alt or Option key down, that brings up the New Layer dialog box. Let's go ahead and call this layer Windows and click OK. And then you want to select that Windows pattern from the bottom of the list. It should be the last pattern you see. And then change the scale value to 25% in order to create this effect here. Then click OK. Now at this point, we're going to have to apply some warping to the layer, which means we need to convert the pattern layer to a smart object by going up to the Layers panel flyout menu and choosing Convert to Smart Object. Then go up to the Edit menu and choose the Free Transform command, or you can press Control-T or Command-T on the Mac. Now click the warp icon over here on the right side of the options bar in order to enter the warp mode, and change the warp option on the left side of the options bar from Custom to Bulge. And then dial in a bend value of 90%. If you go much higher than that, you're going to get a little bit of distortion around the edges. And then press the Enter key or the Return key a couple of times in order to apply that transformation. Next, we want to scoot the effect over, and we'll do so using a filter called Offset. So go up to the Filter menu, choose Other, and choose the Offset command. And because we're working with a smart object, we'll be applying Offset as an editable smart filter. And then dial in a horizontal value of negative 1,275 pixels, which will go ahead and scoot these buildings over to the left. And you want the vertical value to be 0. Make sure that wraparound is turned on down here at the bottom of the dialog box, and then click OK in order to apply that effect. If you zoom in, you'll find that your crease may not look exactly the way you want it to. In my case, it's actually coming out quite nicely. But if it doesn't in your case, or you just want to be sure that we have a nice white seam right down here through the center, then go ahead and create a kind of sliver layer. So press Control-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N on the Mac to bring up the New Layer dialog box and call this new layer Sliver, and then click OK. And now you want to dial in some new marquee values. So go ahead and change the style up here in the options bar to fixed size once again, and change the width value to 4 pixels, that's all. And then increase the height value to the height of the image, which is 3,000 pixels. And press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac. And now click right here at this location in order to create a selection that's just a little wider than that white line. And press Control Backspace or Command Delete on the Mac in order to fill the selection with white. Then press Control D or Command D on the Mac to deselect the image. And if you like, go ahead and restore your style to normal up here in the options bar. I'm going to go ahead and zoom out here. The next thing we want to do is create that rounded bit of building in the foreground over here on the left-hand side. And we're going to base that building on the existing Windows layer. So go ahead and click on it to select it, and then Alt-drag or Option-drag it to the top of the Layers panel in order to create a copy of that layer. And then grab the Smart Filter. Just drag it down to the trash can in order to get rid of it. Now let's go ahead and take this top layer and move it to the left by pressing the Control key or the Command key on the Mac, as well as the Shift key, and dragging this guy over to the left like so. Now, obviously, it's not the right size. We need to scale it. So press Control-T or Command-T on the Mac to enter the free transform mode. And you want to select this middle right reference point up here in the reference point matrix on the far left side of the options bar in order to make it active so that we're scaling the building with respect to its right-hand side. And then turn on the link between the W and H values up here, and through trial and error, I came up with a scale value of 236%. Now I'll go ahead and press the Enter key in order to accept that value. And I also want to scoot the X value just a little bit. I'm going to change this value to 1,366 pixels. Once again, I figured this out through trial and error just by dragging the darn thing around. And now I'll press the Enter key or the Return key a couple of times in order to apply that transformation. Now, it may take a few moments for the transformation to apply because this image is getting quite large and it's computationally intensive. And with that, we finish off the effect. So I'll go ahead and press the F key a couple of times in order to enter the full screen mode. And the result is a compelling piece of black and white op art, created in record time, really, here inside Photoshop.
Hey gang, this is Deke McClellan. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. Now, very possibly you've never heard of Otto and Marie Neurath, but their efforts influence the efforts of every graphic artist and designer working today. Now, I know that sounds like a big claim, but here's the deal. Back in the 1930s, they pioneered this thing called ISOTYPE, which stands for the International System of Typographic Picture Education. And the idea was this: instead of representing common concepts using words, which vary from one language to another and therefore somebody's not going to understand, we represent these concepts using stylized pictograms. And by way of example, I have these two here, man and woman, which you probably see on an almost daily basis. Now, while these modern variations aren't the work of Otto and Marie's team, it's safe to say they wouldn't exist without ISOTYPE. Now, we're going to be creating these pictograms in Illustrator by stroking these two vertical paths. So everything you see here is the result of strokes, partially because it's entertaining, also, however, because it allows us to get the proportions exactly right. We're going to start off with the man symbol because it's easier to make, and then we'll move on to the woman symbol in the next movie. Here, let me show you exactly how it works.
All right, here's the universal male and female symbols, just so you can see where we're going. We're going to start off inside this illustration. And you can see it just contains two path outlines, each relegated to an independent layer. In this movie, we'll build the male symbol. So I'll go ahead and select this first path outline here, the one over on the left-hand side. Then I'll go to the window menu and choose the Appearance command to bring up the Appearance panel, which allows me, among other things, to stack multiple fills and strokes on top of each other. We're going to start by creating the right leg. I'll do that by clicking on the word stroke right there. And I'm going to change the line weight value to 28 points and then turn on round cap in order to create this effect here. Then what you want to do with your stroke selected here inside the Appearance panel, go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and then choose the Transform command, which will allow us to move the stroke independently of the path outline. Go ahead and turn on the Preview checkbox so you can see what you're doing, and change the vertical scale value to 70%, like so. And then go ahead and select the bottom point inside this little reference point matrix, which is located on the right side of the dialog box in CS5 and earlier, but it's over here in CS6. I'll go ahead and turn it on. And then I'll change the horizontal move value to 19 points. Finally, you want to make sure that Scale, Strokes, and Effects is turned off. If you don't see that checkbox, don't worry about it, but if you do see it, go ahead and turn the checkbox off. So you're scaling the virtual path that Illustrator is stroking here, but you're not scaling the line weight itself. Then go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. And notice here in the Appearance panel, if you twirl open the stroke by clicking on this little twirly triangle, then you should see a transform effect assigned to that stroke. Now that we've created the right leg, it's easy to create the left leg. All you do is make sure the stroke is highlighted, and then click on the little page icon at the bottom of the appearance panel to create a duplicate of that stroke. Then click on its transform. This is the new stroke. Notice that we have two of them now. Click on this guy's transform effect in order to bring up the transform effect dialog box and change the horizontal value from positive 19 points to negative 19 points, and then turn on the preview checkbox and you'll see two legs. Then click OK. Now to create the body, go ahead and click on the stroke to make it active, that most recent stroke at the top of the stack. Click on the little page icon in order to duplicate it and change its line weight to 66 points. You also want to click on the word stroke in order to bring up the stroke panel and then set the cap back to a butt cap so that we get rid of those rounded edges. Now click on the word transform in order to bring up the transform effect dialog box. Go ahead and tab down to the vertical scale value and change it to 40%. And then you want to change the horizontal move value to 0 and the vertical move value to 54 points. Go ahead and select this top point inside this little reference point matrix. Again, it's over here on the right-hand side in CS5 and earlier, and turn on a preview checkbox. And you'll see this little body right there. Now click OK. Now, one of the things about the universal symbols is that everything about them is rounded. Even the joint between the legs right here rounds upward. And so we need to add another stroke, this time a white stroke, by clicking on one of the 28-point strokes, one of the legs there, and then you want to Alt-drag or Option-drag it to the top of the stack in order to create a copy of it like so. Click on a little color swatch in order to bring up the swatches panel and change this stroke to white. Then reduce the line weight to 10 points and click on the word transform in order to once again bring up the transform effect dialog box. Go ahead and click the center point in this reference point matrix in order to scale the stroke with respect to its center. And then change the vertical scale value to 20%, change the horizontal move value to 0, and change the vertical move value to 54. And then to see the effect, go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox. And you can see that we have a little bit of roundness between those two legs. Now click OK in order to apply that effect. The next step is to create the arms. I'm going to base the arms on the legs, so I'm going to go ahead and select the bottommost stroke in the stack and then Alt-drag or Option-drag it to the top of the stack in order to create a copy of that stroke. I'll change its line weight to 24 points this time around. Go ahead and click on Transform, as always, to bring up the Transform Effect dialog box. You want to go ahead and reset that reference point matrix to the center point. That's very important. And then I came up with these values. I'll go ahead and change the vertical scale value to 26%. And I'll dial in a horizontal move value of 55 points and a vertical move value of negative 18. And then if you turn on a preview checkbox, you should see this distended arm sitting over here on the right-hand side. Now click OK. As with the left leg, it's very easy to create a left arm based on this existing one. So I'll just go ahead and click on the stroke to make it active, and then click on a little page icon at the bottom of the appearance panel to make a copy of it. Now click on Transform and just change the horizontal value from positive 55 to negative 55. Turn on a preview checkbox and you've got yourself another arm. The next step is to create the shoulders. And this is actually the trickiest step of them all, because so far the math has worked in our favor and everything's aligned exactly as it should be. Even if things appear not to be precisely aligned on screen, they actually are, as we'll see. But the shoulders, pretty darn difficult to get them into alignment without just fussing around with them, which is what I ultimately did. So I'll just show you the settings I came up with. I'll go ahead and click on this top stroke to make it active. Click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel in order to create a copy of it. Click on the word transform in order to bring up the transform effect dialog box. Let's go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox, and I'll change the angle value to 90 degrees, which goes ahead and rotates the stroke so that it's perpendicular to the path outline. Now I ended up setting the vertical scale value to 28%, and I came up with a horizontal move value of 0 and a vertical move value of negative 56 in order to come up with these shoulders right there. Now go ahead and click the OK button. And then we want to change the line weight value. The line weight that I came up with that best matched the other strokes is 59.5 points. So again, where the shoulders are concerned, this is all trial and error. Now we need to create some white negative space underneath the arms. So go ahead and click on this 24-point stroke, which represents the right arm. Alt or Option drag it to the top of the stack like so in order to create a copy of it. Now click on his color swatch and change it to white, and change the line weight to 10 points, just like the gap between the legs. And then go ahead and click on Transform. And I dialed in a vertical value of 24%. And then we want the horizontal move value to be 38 points and a vertical move value to be negative 16 points. And then if you turn on the preview checkbox, you'll see the stroke align underneath the right arm. Now go ahead and click OK. We need to do the same thing on the left side, so go ahead and click on that stroke to make it active. Click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel to make a copy of it. Click Transform to bring up the Transform dialog box, and then just change the horizontal value from 38 points to negative 38 points and turn on the preview checkbox, and we end up with this effect here. Now click OK. Now the only thing missing is his head, and we're going to create the head as a fill. So go ahead and grab the fill at the bottom of the stack and drag it up to the top of the stack like so that the fill is sitting on top of the strokes. Then click on a little color swatch there, which appears as a little red slash to indicate transparency, and change it to black. Now, you're not actually going to see anything change because you're trying to fill an open straight path outline. However, we can make this look quite different here by clicking on the fill to make it active, and then going up to the Effect menu, choosing Convert to Shape, and then you want to choose Ellipse. And notice that we get this big, huge ellipse on screen here. I don't want it to have a relative size. I want it to have an absolute size. So go ahead and switch to absolute. Your preview checkbox should be turned on, by the way, and dial in width and height values of 52 points apiece. You're not really going to see the circle. It's sitting right there in the center of the path. We need to move it up. So go ahead and click OK. And then to move the fill upward, make sure it's selected here inside the Appearance panel. Then go up to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform effect. And then dial in a vertical move value of negative 122 points. And where these move values are concerned, by the way, positive horizontal values move things to the right, negative values move them to the left. Positive vertical values move things down, negative vertical values move them up, which is a little counterintuitive, but that's the way it works. Then go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox, and you'll see that head pop upward. Then go ahead and click OK in order to accept that effect. Now that you've drawn this guy as a series of crazy attributes, here's the thing to bear in mind. If you grab your Rotate tool, and then you go ahead and rotate the path outline, then it's going to fall apart. And that's because of all those dynamic transform effects that we assigned. So if you want something that's a little more concrete, a little more flexible, that you can also manipulate as a path outline, then I'll first press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo the rotation. And then I'll switch back to the Layers panel. Take the man layer here and Alt-drag or Option-drag him upward to above the woman layer in order to make a copy of him. And then double-click somewhere on that layer in order to bring up the Layer Options dialog box. I'll rename this layer Paths, and I'll change the color to grass green. Of course, you can go your own way if you like. Then I'll click OK. I'm going to turn off the original man layer so I don't end up harming it. And here's the 4 steps required to convert all these strokes to path outlines. Step number 1 is to go up to the Object menu and choose Expand Appearance. And that will go ahead and give you a bunch of stroked paths as well as this filled path at the top. The next thing you want to do is convert all the strokes to filled path outlines by going back to the Object menu, choosing Path, and then choosing Outline Stroke. And you'll end up with this effect here. Now you want to go ahead and merge all these path outlines according to their colors. And you do that using an obscure Pathfinder operation. And here's how you get to it. You go to the Window menu, and then you choose the Pathfinder command in order to bring up the Pathfinder panel. And then this guy right here is the one we want, Merge. Go ahead and click on the Merge icon in order to merge those paths together. And then finally, what you want to do is go up to the Object menu and choose the Ungroup command in order to ungroup these path outlines. The reason we want to ungroup them is because we've got a lot of white paths that are nested inside the black ones. So go ahead and press the V key to switch back to your black arrow tool. Click off the path outlines to deselect them. And click on one of these white path outlines to select it. And then go up to this icon on the far right side of the control panel. And notice that it says Select Similar Objects. Go ahead and click the down pointing arrowhead next to it and choose Fill Color. And that will select all the paths that have white fills. Press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of them. Now, he's not entirely perfect. If you click on this black path outline here, you'll see that most everything associated with the body and the legs and the arms works out great. The only tiny problem is around the shoulders. So if you press the Control and Spacebar keys That's Command and Spacebar on the Mac in order to get your zoom tool, and then just drag around this little area. You'll see that we've got this little divot right there in the shoulder. If that bothers you, press the A key to switch to the wide arrow tool, click off the path outline to deselect it, and then click on that little anchor point right there to select it, and press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of it. And then go up to the Object menu, choose Path, and choose Join. And that'll join those two previous endpoints right there with a new straight segment. And now you just want to do the same thing to the other side of the shoulder. So I'll just go ahead and zoom out here and then Control Spacebar drag or Command Spacebar drag on the Mac around this left-hand shoulder. Then just go ahead and marquee around this point in order to select it. Press the backspace key to get rid of it. Go back to the Object menu, choose Path, and choose Join once again. Now I'll go ahead and zoom back out here. And now, if I grab my black arrow tool once again, and I marquee these two paths in order to select them, might as well go ahead and group them together by going to the Object menu and choosing the Group command. And now, if I switch to my Rotate tool, I can go ahead and rotate this guy any way I want, and he holds up just fine. But as it so turns out, I don't want him to be rotated. And that, folks, is how you create the universal sign for the male gender by heaping a bunch of strokes onto a path outline here inside Illustrator. Seriously, who thought creating the plain old man symbol here could be so much fun? Now, if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, then I have a follow-up movie in which we copy the dude over onto the other vertical line and turn him into a lady, which is more than just adding a dress. It's also lifting the arm so it looks like she's trying to fly. Now, if you're waiting for next week's free movie, Valentine's Day is, like 3 weeks away, and these two, it looks to me like they have so much in common. I figure we ought to scoot them together and have them fall in love. Once again, just using strokes inside of Illustrator. Deeks techniques, each and every week. Keep watching. In this movie, I'll show you how to create the universal symbol for female, and we'll do so just as we did in the previous movie by combining a bunch of strokes on a single path outline. And then we'll expand those strokes to create these final path outlines here. I'll go ahead and switch over to the document that contains the male symbol, and then I'll switch to my Layers panel and turn off the Paths layer, which contains the expanded version of the paths, and then turn on the Man layer, which is the one that contains the strokes. And now I'll marquee this path with the black arrow tool to select it. Many of these attributes are going to work just as well for the female symbol as they did for the male symbol, including the legs and the head and so forth. So it's going to be easiest if we use the male symbol as a starting point. I'm going to save off all the attributes by going up to the Window menu and choosing Graphic Styles. And then inside the Graphic Styles, you want to press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel. And because you have Alt or Option down, that forces the display of this dialog box. That way I can go ahead and name the style and then click OK. Now I'll select the right-hand path, the one on the woman layer, and I'll click on that graphic style I just made in order to assign all those attributes. Now I'll hide the Graphic Styles panel. To gain access to the attributes, you go to the Window menu and choose the Appearance command. And now you can see this series of strokes here. So we've got 2 strokes down at the bottom for the legs. We've got this guy right there, that's the body. A few of these we want to turn off for the moment, especially the arms. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off both the 24-point black strokes as well as the 2 10-point white strokes at the top of the stack. These shoulders are going to work out pretty well, but they need to be a little narrower for the female symbol. So I'll twirl open this 59.5-point stroke, and then I'll click on Transform in order to bring up the Transform Effect dialog box, and I'll reduce the vertical value to 24 points. And then I'll turn on the Preview checkbox, which makes the shoulders a little narrower. Now you may wonder, why in the world does the vertical value affect the horizontal attribute of the stroke? And the reason is because it's rotated 90 degrees. I'll go ahead and click OK in order to accept that change. The next thing we want to do is convert the body here into a dress. And because it's a triangular shape, our best bet is going to be an arrowhead. So I'll go ahead and twirl this 66-point stroke open. And then I'll change its line weight from 66 points to a mere 4.5 points. So you can see this thin stroke right there. Now I'll click on the word stroke in order to bring up the stroke panel. And I'll change this first arrowhead option to arrow 7 in order to assign an arrowhead to the top of this stroke. Now, at this point, we can't really see it, and that's because it's hidden by the shoulders. So I'll go ahead and temporarily turn off the transform effect here, just so we can see what's going on. And there is the arrowhead right there at the top of the path. Now, we want it to be much bigger than this, and we want it to consume the entire stroke. So I'll click on the word stroke once again. Anytime you want an arrowhead to consume its entire stroke so that you're not seeing any line, you want to change the scale value under that arrowhead to 1,000%. And that ends up giving us a very big arrowhead indeed. Now we're going to transform it using that transform effect. Of course, I need to turn it back on in order to see it in action. And then I'll click on the word transform to bring up the transform effect dialog box. And I'll turn on the preview checkbox just so I can see what I'm doing. And I'll also select the center point inside the reference point matrix, which is located on the right side of the dialog box in CS5 and earlier. Now I'll change the horizontal scale value to 34%. And I'll take the vertical scale value down to 60%. Now we need to scoot this dress shape upward. So I'll go ahead and change the vertical move value to -108. Now, if you look carefully, you'll see that the arrowhead's not quite centered on the path outline, which is why I took the horizontal value down to -1. With that dress intact, go ahead and click OK. Obviously, it shouldn't exceed all the way into the woman's head here, so we need to cut it off under the shoulders by adding another stroke, and I'll do that by clicking on this 10-point white stroke, which represents the negative space between her legs. I'll click on the little page icon at the bottom of the appearance panel to create a copy of it. And then I'll change the line weight of the lower of the two strokes to 84 points, and I'll go ahead and click on Transform in order to bring up the Transform dialog box, turn on the Preview checkbox, and change the angle value to -90 degrees. I'll also change the vertical scale value to 28%. And then finally, I'll change the vertical move value to -124. And that goes ahead and places the stroke approximately at this position here, which covers up the top of the arrowhead. And now I'll click OK. Now the negative space between the legs extends too far into the dress. So what we want to do is twirl close this 84-point stroke and twirl open this 10-point stroke and click on its transform and change the vertical value to 97 points. And then turn on the preview checkbox and we end up with this effect here. Now go ahead and click OK. The next thing we need to do is create the arms. So this guy right here is the right arm, and this is the space between the right arm and the body. Obviously, we need to rotate both of those paths. And it's going to be easier to create the left arm based on those rotated paths. So I'm going to go ahead and take the two strokes that remain hidden, this top one, and then I'll control click or command click on this 24-point stroke to select it as well. And I'm going to get rid of them by clicking on the little trash icon at the bottom of the appearance panel. Now with this 24-point stroke twirled open, I'll go ahead and click on its transform effect to once again visit the transform effect dialog box. And I'll change the vertical scale value to 32%. And then I'll change the horizontal and vertical move values to 61.5 and -22 respectively. And then finally, I'm going to change the angle value to 18 degrees. And these are just settings I came up with through trial and error. Now I'll turn on the preview checkbox and you can see that we end up with this rotated arm. So assuming you have the same effect I do, go ahead and click OK. Now we want to twirl open this top 10-point white stroke, click on its transform effect, and change the vertical value to 60%, and then change the horizontal and vertical move values to 60 points and 28 points apiece. And now I'll go ahead and turn on the preview checkbox so we can see what we've got. It's a vertical line at this point. We want it to be angled. So I'll go ahead and change the angle value to that same angle that we used for the arm, which is 18 degrees. And we end up with this effect here. Now click OK. Now we need to make a copy of both those paths in order to create the left arm. So go ahead and click on the 24-point black stroke in order to select it. And then Control or Command click on the 10-point white stroke at the top of the stack. And then press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and drag this guy all the way up the top of the list like so. And you'll go ahead and make a copy of both of those strokes as you see here. Let's twirl some of these guys close so things are a little less confusing. And I'll drag this 24-point stroke so that it's sitting directly on top of the other one. And then I'll twirl it open because I need to change its settings. Click on Transform in order to bring up the Transform Effect dialog box. And all you need to do in order to convert the right arm into a left arm is change the horizontal move value to negative and change the angle value to negative as well. And then turn on the preview checkbox, and you can see that we end up with a left arm that's exactly symmetrical to the right one. Now click OK, and we'll do pretty much the same thing for the white 10-point stroke at the top here. Click on its transform, change its horizontal move value from positive to negative, and change its angle value from positive to negative as well. Turn on the preview checkbox, and we end up with this effect here. Then click OK. Now that we've finished off the effect, we might as well save it off as another graphic style. I'll go back to the window menu, choose the graphic styles command, and then I'll alt-click or option-click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel and go ahead and name this new style female and click OK. Just as with the male style, this thing falls apart if you rotate the path. And just to show you what I mean, I'll go ahead and select the rotate tool and drag around inside the window, and everything completely falls apart. So if you want something that's going to hold up better, you want to convert these strokes to filled paths. So I'll go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that change. Then I'll switch back to the Layers panel. I'll turn on the Paths layer, and I will Alt-drag or Option-drag this little blue square up onto the Paths layer like so. And that'll go ahead and make a duplicate of the female symbol. And now I'll turn off both the woman and man layers below. Now, to convert these strokes to paths, you start by going to the Object menu and choosing Expand Appearance. And that gives you a bunch of different strokes path outlines, as you can see here. Then you convert those strokes to filled paths by going back to the Object menu, choosing Path, and then choosing Outline Stroke. The next step is to merge all these path outlines with each other according to their colors by going up to the Window menu and choosing the Pathfinder command. And then inside the Pathfinder panel, you want to click on this icon right here, Merge. And that will go ahead and produce this effect here. Now you want to ungroup the paths so that you can get rid of the excess white path outlines. And you do that, of course, by going up to the Object menu and choosing the Ungroup command. Go ahead and press the V key to switch back to your black arrow tool and click off the paths to deselect them. And just marquee around this general area here in order to select this path around the woman's head. And now you want to go up to the Select Similar Objects icon on the far right side of the control panel. Click on the down pointing arrowhead next to it and choose Fill Color. If it's already selected, as it is in my case, then go ahead and click on the icon in order to select all the white paths and press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of them. And now we've got just these two path outlines here, one for the body and one for the head. And at this point, we might as well go ahead and group them together by going to the Object menu and choosing the Group command. And now, of course, if I was to switch back to my Rotate tool by pressing the R key and drag around inside the illustration, you can see that I'm rotating the symbol without having it fall apart. I want to leave it upright, though, so I'll just go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac, and then I'll press Control-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A in order to deselect my artwork. And that's how you create the universal symbol for female by building up a bunch of strokes on a single path outline, including an arrowhead for the dress, here inside Illustrator. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. Now, you might remember the two ISOTYPE symbols from last week. Well, Valentine's Day is just 2 weeks and 2 days away. Little friendly reminder, by the way. And so I figured these two, you just look at them. They got so much in common. We had to just scoot them together and let the sparks fly. And we're going to do so. We're going to create everything here, including the little heart, using just strokes inside of Illustrator. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, here's the final version of the hand-holding gender symbols, just so you can see them on screen. I'll switch over to the most recent version of my document, in which the two symbols are not holding hands. And I'm going to turn off that paths layer, and I'm going to turn on the woman and man layer here inside the Layers panel. And I'm going to select all the objects on this layer as well by pressing Control-A or Command-A on the Mac. And then I'm going to create a new layer on top of the paths layer by clicking on it, and then I'll Alt-click or Option-click on the little page icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. Let's name this layer Hands, and I'll change the color of the layer to violet. And then I'll click OK. Now I'm going to make copies of the selected objects by Alt-dragging each one of the colored squares. So I'll Alt-drag or Option-drag the red square first, and then I'll Alt or Option-drag the blue square second. And you can see that that goes ahead and makes copies of both male and female symbols. Now I'll go ahead and turn off those two bottom layers so that just the hands layer is selected. That's very important if you don't want to run the risk of messing up the previous paths. Now I'll go ahead and marquee the left-hand path to select it. And then I'll switch to the Appearance panel by going to the Window menu and choosing the Appearance command. We just want to edit a couple of strokes here for now, including this 24-point stroke right there, which represents the right arm, that is to say his left arm. And we want to make it bend outwards. So I'll go ahead and twirl that stroke open, click on Transform, and dial in a few new values here. I'll increase the vertical scale value to 32%, and then I'll change the horizontal move value to 64 points, and I'll change the vertical move value to -22, and then I'll change the angle to 18 degrees so it matches the angle of the woman's arm, and I'll turn on the preview checkbox, and you can see we get this effect here. Now that ends up misaligning it with the other strokes, but we'll take care of that problem in a minute. Go ahead and click OK, and then click on the lower of the two 10-point white strokes in order to make it active, and we want to make a copy of it by dropping down to the little page icon at the bottom of the Appearance panel and clicking on it. And then twirl open the copy and click on its transform effect, and then dial in these values. We want the vertical scale to be 60%. We want the horizontal move value to be 63 points. The vertical move value should be 28 points. And finally, I'm going to dial in an angle value of 18 degrees. These are all values I came up with through trial and error. Now I'll turn on the preview checkbox, and you can see we get this nice effect here. Still got a problem with the shoulder, so I'll click OK. Twirl all these strokes closed, and then twirl open the 59.5 point stroke, which represents the shoulders, and click on its transform effect. The shoulders are tricky, and you just kind of have to feel your way through them. So I came up with a vertical scale value of 26.7%, which if I turn on the preview checkbox, you can see that shrinks the shoulders horizontally because they're rotated 90 degrees. And now I'm going to go ahead and nudge the shoulders over to the left just a little bit by dialing in a horizontal move value of -1.5. And we end up with this effect here. Click OK. Now at this point, he's reaching for her, but she's too far away for them to hold hands. So I'm going to move both the paths together. And I'll do that by double-clicking on a black arrow tool here inside the toolbox to bring up the Move dialog box. And I'll change the horizontal value to 20 points, and I'll leave the vertical value set to 0 points like so. Now click OK. That moves him closer to her, but she's still a little far away. So I'll go ahead and marquee around her in order to select the right-hand path. Double-click on a black arrow tool once again and bring up the Move dialog box. That moves her farther away from the guy, which is not what we're looking for at all. So I'll dial in a horizontal move value, this time of -20 points. And that goes ahead and scoots them together. Click OK. We still need to create the heart, and we're going to do so using a bunch of strokes. And I'm going to assign those strokes to the guy. So I'll go ahead and marquee the left-hand path, and I'm going to zoom in on this path as well so that I can get a better idea of what's going on. With the path selected, I'll go ahead and click on the top fill here in the Appearance panel to make it active, and I'm going to twirl close those shoulders there. And now I'll make a copy of that fill by clicking on the little page icon at the bottom of the Appearance panel, and I'm going to change the color of this fill to red. And that gives them a red head. That's not what we want. We need to move it into a different position and scale it. So I'm going to twirl this fill open and click on ellipse to bring up the shape options here. I'm going to dial in a width and height value of 22 points apiece. Absolute should be turned on, and if so, you'll end up with an effect like this. Then click OK. Now we need to scoot it over. So I'll click on the word transform there in order to bring up this dialog box. I'll dial in a vertical move value of -128, and I'll change the horizontal value to 65 points. And if I turn on the preview checkbox, that goes ahead and scoots this shape out here. And now I'll click OK in order to accept that effect. Now we've got a little bit of a problem going on here because the female path is in front. And so that stroke that I'm using to cover up the top of the black arrowhead that represents the dress is also covering up a little bit of this incipient heart here. So I need to move him to the front, and I'll do that by right-clicking and choosing Arrange, and then choosing Bring to Front. Just the simplest way to make that happen. Now let's make a copy of that red circle by clicking on the red fill at the top of the Appearance panel, and I'll click on a little page icon at the bottom of the panel to make a copy of it. I'll twirl the copy closed, I'll twirl open the original, click on Transform in order to bring up the Transform Effect dialog box, and I'll just change this one value, horizontal move value, to 87 points and turn on the preview checkbox, and we end up with 2 circles. Now I'll click OK. Now we need to create the triangular bottom to the heart using an arrowhead. So I'll go ahead and twirl close the red fill. I'll click on the black fill to make it active. And then I'll just click on this Add New Stroke icon in the bottom left corner of the Appearance panel. And I'll dial in a line weight value of 4 points. And I'll go ahead and change the color of this stroke to red once again, because it's part of the heart. And then I'll click on the word stroke, and I'll change the end arrowhead, so the second arrowhead option, to arrow 1, which has a little bit of curvature, as you can see. That'll work well for a heart. The arrowhead's way at the bottom of the guy here, but because I want the arrowhead to consume the entire stroke, I'm going to change its scale value, that is the second value here, to 1,000%. And we end up with this ginormous arrowhead. And now you can click off to hide the panel. We need to make it smaller, so I'll go to the Effect menu, choose Distort and Transform, and choose the Transform effect. And then I'll dial in horizontal and vertical scale values of 19 and 12% apiece, and I'll turn on the Preview checkbox so you can see what kind of difference that makes. And now I'll change the horizontal move value to 76 points, and I'll change the vertical move value to negative 77.6. Ends up working best here. And then I'll press the Tab key in order to invoke that change. And we end up with an arrowhead that more than consumes the space that we're devoting to the heart. So we'll need to use another stroke in order to crop this area away. Go ahead and click OK to accept that arrowhead. And then click on one of the red fills in order to make it active, and click on the little page icon in order to create a copy of it. Then click on the bottommost of these fills and change the color from red to white. And you also want to go ahead and twirl the fill open and click on the word ellipse there. We're not going to want an ellipse this time. Instead, we're going to want to switch it to a rectangle. So go ahead and choose rectangle from the shape pop-up menu. And then the values we want are a width of 82 points and a height of 28 points. And we end up with this effect here. Now click OK. Now to move it into a better position, click on Transform in order to bring up the Transform Effect dialog box and change the horizontal move value to 76 and the vertical move value to negative 134. And then I'll turn on the Preview checkbox, and you can see that that does a nice job of cropping away the extra portion of the arrowhead, but we're left with a little bit of a hole between the circles. So go ahead and click OK, and click on the white fill to make it active, and then go ahead and click on the little page icon at the bottom of the panel to make a copy of it. Let's change the color of this fill to red this time around. Obviously, we've got some work to do here, so I'll click on the word rectangle in order to bring up the Shape Options dialog box. I'll change the width value to 26 points, and I'll change the height value to 12 points. Then click OK. And now click on the word Transform in order to bring up the Transform panel for the final time. And we're OK with the horizontal move value of 76 points, but we want to change the vertical move value to negative 122 points. And then turn on the Preview checkbox in order to see the results of that change. Now click OK in order to accept the effect, and we now have a heart created entirely from fill and stroke attributes. Just to play it safe, I'm going to go ahead and bring up my Graphic Styles panel by going to the Window menu and choosing Graphic Styles. And I'll Alt-click or Option-click on the little page icon to bring up this dialog box. And I'll go ahead and call this guy Hand Holder, and then I'll click OK. And now we can apply these attributes to any other path outline we like. Now, of course, things are going to fall apart with this path if I were to rotate it. For example, if I press the R key to switch to the Rotate tool and then drag, you can see that everything goes haywire. So if I want to keep things more flexible, I'll need to expand the effect. I'll go ahead and press Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that change. Switch back over to the Layers panel and make a copy of the hands layer by dragging it and dropping it onto the little page icon at the bottom of the panel. And now I'll double-click somewhere inside this layer, and I'll go ahead and rename it Love, and then I'll change the color from violet to gold. Then I'll click OK. Now I'll turn off the original hands layer so that we're protecting the original paths, and I'll press Ctrl-A or Command-A on the Mac to select all of my artwork. Press the V key to switch back to my black arrow tool, and I'll go up to the Object menu and choose Expand Appearance. Now we need to convert all these strokes to filled path outlines. So go up to the Object menu, choose Path, and then choose Outline Stroke. Now we want to go ahead and merge all the paths according to their colors. So go to the Window menu, choose Pathfinder, and then inside the Pathfinder panel, you want to click on the Merge icon in order to produce this effect here. Now we need to get rid of the extra garbage. So go up to the Object menu and choose the Ungroup command, And finally, you just want to marquee around one of these white shapes like so to select it. Then go up to the Select Similar Objects icon on the right side of the control panel. Click the down pointing arrowhead, change it to fill color, and then click on the icon in order to select all the shapes that are filled with white and press the backspace or delete key to get rid of them. And now if you twirl open the love layer, you'll see that you've got a heart on top, two black circular heads, and then look, they're so in love that their two bodies are merged together as a single path outline. Now, we do have some garbagey paths down here. As you can see, these three lowest paths. If you want to get rid of them, just meatball one and shift meatball the other two. That is to say, click on their circles to select them, and then press the backspace key or the delete key on the Mac to get rid of those as well. And that's it, folks. That's how you create two gender symbols in love.
All right, so much for the ISOTYPE couple. I wish them the very best. Love can be a dangerous game, even for a pictogram. Next week, we'll take up with a couple of other universal symbols, namely woman and man, and we'll combine them into a series of Andy Warhol-like silkscreen treatments. A lot of cool stuff going on here. Deeks Techniques, each and every week. Keep watching. Hey gang, this is Deke McClellan. Welcome to Deeks Techniques. This week begins a look at the work of Andy Warhol. Specifically, we'll be creating these Warhol-like silkscreen / serograph variations, and we'll be doing so in Photoshop. Now, there are all kinds of websites and apps out there that allow you to automatically convert images into Warhol effects. They're no good. Even though Warhol fervently believed in automation, his studio was called The Factory after all, and apparently in his last couple of years he used a Commodore Amiga, which for you youngsters was a precursor to the Mac. He was still a human being, and so we're going to use our human skills to convert this portrait photo from Ollie of the Fotolia image library into this Warhol treatment right here, complete with canvas texture in the midtones. Here, let me show you exactly how it works.
All right, here's the basic Warhol effect that we're going for. It's extremely high contrast with all kinds of clip shadows and highlights. Notice also that we've got this kind of irregular canvas texture going on inside of the midtones. It's called Portrait Shot 1B.PSD because in the final variations image here, she's 1A, she's 1B, and she's 1C, for what it's worth. Anyway, I'm going to switch over to the base image, which is a portrait shot from the Fotolia image library, about which you can learn more at fotolia.com/Deke. Let's go ahead and convert this to a high contrast black and white image by pressing the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac. And then you want to click on this black and white circle at the bottom of the Layers panel and choose the black and white command. And go ahead and name the layer B and W or something like that, and turn on this checkbox, use previous layer to create clipping mask, so that you're affecting the photograph independently of the rest of the image. Then click OK. The whole idea behind the Warhol Factory was we're producing automated artwork. So let's just work with a preset here. The preset that works best for this image is high contrast red filter, and we end up with this effect here. Next, press the Alt or Option key again. Click the black-white icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and choose the Levels command, which will allow us to increase the contrast of the image. Go ahead and call this layer Contrast, and once again turn on the checkbox, and then click OK. This time around, you want to increase the black point value underneath the histogram to 40, tab your way over to the white point value, which is the third one, and change it to 160, and then press Shift-Tab to go back to the midtones value and change it to 2. To dramatically expand the midtones inside the image. So we're clipping the heck out of the highlights, clipping the shadows as well, and then breathing some life into the remaining midtones. Now go ahead and hide the Properties panel. The next step is to add some texture to those midtones, and I've already included a texture layer inside this image, once again from the Fotolia image library. You can go ahead and turn it on. Back out from the image a little bit because we're going to want to transform this texture. And the idea is right now it's too linear. If you zoom in on it, you can see that we've got a bunch of perpendicular lines. That's not what you're going to see in real stretched canvas. It's going to kind of wave around. Again, I'm going to zoom out. And just so I can change my mind later on if I want to, I'm going to convert this guy to a smart object by bringing up the flyout menu and choosing the Convert to Smart Object command.
Then go up to the Edit menu and choose Free Transform, where you can press Control-T or Command-T on the Mac. And we'll start things off by switching over to the warp mode, which you can get by clicking on this little warp icon up here in the control panel, and then change the warp setting to Arch. And we end up with this effect here. I really wanted to go at a different angle. So what I did was I switched out of the warp mode for a moment, and then I dragged inside the image window in order to rotate the image like so. So I'm dragging outside the bounding box. And I'm ultimately looking for an angle of about 94 degrees. So something along these lines is going to work out just fine. That ends up with a layer that's a little too high. So I'll go ahead and drag it down so that it covers at least most of the image. And then I'll switch back to the warp mode by clicking on the warp icon once again. And now notice this handle that allows you to change the bend of the warp. I'm going to drag it over to the left until my bend value is close to negative 27% up here in the control panel. And I've got negative 26.7. That's going to work out just fine. Then you want to switch back out of the warp mode again because we need to move this layer around a little bit. So click on the warp icon and then just drag inside of the bounding box to move the layer to a better location so that it covers up all of the image. And then press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to apply that transformation and warp. Now we want to go ahead and clip this texture layer inside the photograph. So press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click on the horizontal line between the texture layer and the contrast layer. And you'll end up with this slight clipping here. And then you want to change the blend mode from normal here in the top left corner of the layers panel to overlay in order to produce this effect. And now if I go ahead and zoom in, you can see that we have this wonderful canvas texturing going on inside the midtones of her face. Now you want to paint a bunch of vivid colors on independent layers. And in the name of expediency, I've done that in advance. So I'll go ahead and twirl open this color fills group right there. And you can see at the top of the stack, I have this layer called Eyes. And I just went ahead and painted it directly on top of the layer. That is, it's on an independent layer, as you can see, but I'm painting over the contents of the layers below, just so I can keep track of what's going on. And the eyes are actually bigger than her eyes. So it's not only permissible to go outside the outlines, it's preferable. That's what you want for a classic Warhol effect. Next, I'll turn on the eyelids layer, and you can see that we've got these vivid green eyelids here. I've got these pink lips as well on the lips layer. And if I zoom out a little bit so that we can see the shirt, I've got this shirt layer right there. That's painting it a dark purple. I'll go ahead and scroll down the list to this face layer and turn it on. And I want you to see something about the face. This is a color that I just went ahead and lifted from her face for this specific effect, by the way. But I'll go ahead and zoom in here, and you can see that I've got all these lumps around my brush strokes, and this is all brushwork that I applied using the brush tool. But if I were to press the B key to switch to the brush tool and then right-click inside the image, I want you to notice that the hardness value is cranked up to 100%. I'm using one of the standard circular brushes here. I'll go ahead and press the Escape key to hide that panel. The reason we're getting the lumps is because of the spacing value. And you get to the spacing value by going up to the window menu and choosing the brush command. And it's this guy right here. By default, it's cranked up to 25%, which gives you these lumps all over the place. If you don't want the lumps, which you don't, then you reduce the spacing value to about 10%. Works out nicely. And what's happening here is Photoshop is laying down a bunch of blobs of paint. The lower you go with the spacing value, the more processor intensive the operation is, so the brush strokes might start slowing down, but not at 10. They're going to work just fine. So go ahead and close that panel. Now, I'm not terribly concerned by the lumps because I've got another layer here. And I painted this one using a pressure-sensitive tablet. I'll go ahead and turn it on. It's the hair layer. And so I just went ahead and painted in some very thick, snake-like hair patterns using a pressure-sensitive tablet once again, a Wacom Intuos, as it just so happens. And in order to smooth things out in the face, I dragged the hair layer on top of the face layer in order to produce this effect here. Now let's go ahead and mix these colors along with the original image. And you do that by, in this case, twirling close this color fills group so that we can better see the layers below. And you want to initially paint these layers in front of the image. That's the easiest way to work. But when all's said and done, these layers need to go to the back of the stack. And the easiest way to move the group to the back of the stack is to press a keyboard shortcut, which is Control-Shift-Left bracket. That's Command-Shift-Left bracket on the Mac. You could also drag the group down the stack, but my layer thumbnails are so large that that's difficult to do. Anyway, notice that moves the entire group just above the background and below the layer with the photograph. I'll now click on the layer with the photograph in order to select it, and I'll change the blend mode for that layer to multiply, which will go ahead and drop out the whites and merge the blacks and the midtones and so forth into the colors below. I want the background to have a color as well, so I'll go ahead and click on that background to make it active. And then I'll go to the color panel. Notice I'm working with my HSB values. To get to them, you go to the flyout menu and choose HSB sliders. And I wanted a kind of vivid magenta. So the values I came up with were 300 for the hue value, a saturation of 50, and a brightness value of 65. And then I'll press Alt Backspace or Option Delete on the Mac in order to fill the background with that color. Now at this point it struck me that the hair shouldn't be blonde. I want it to be blue like her eyes. And it's a very easy matter once you've established your base color layers to change their colors anytime you like. So I'll go ahead and twirl open this color fills group once again. And because I want to lift a color from the eyes layer, I'll go ahead and click on it to make it active. And then I'll press the I key to switch to the eyedropper tool. You can also get to it from the toolbox. Now, by default, you're going to lift the merged version of a color, which means you may not get the pure color of the eyes, depending on where you click. So go up to the control panel and change the sample option to current layer. And then you can click anywhere inside the eye, even in the pupil, in order to lift that shade of blue. Then go ahead and scroll down the list to the hair layer, click on it to make it active, and press the keyboard shortcut Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Backspace on the Mac in order to fill the hair with that blue. And by virtue of the fact you have the Alt or Option key down, you're filling with the foreground color. By virtue of the fact that you have the Shift key down, you're respecting the layer's transparency. So you're only filling in the brush strokes and nothing more. Now at this point you can stop if you want to. This is the base effect. However, in researching Warhol paintings, I found that most of them include some borders around the sides, which are borders left over from the screen printing process. They're essentially happy accidents. If you scroll up the list, go ahead and twirl close the color fills group and go all the way to the top of the stack, you'll see this layer called frame, which is another image from the Fotolia image library. I'm going to go ahead and click on that frame layer to make it active and change its blend mode from normal to multiply. And notice I also have this layer mask that I've created in advance. And what that does is it just gets rid of some of the garbage on the interior. But before I apply it, I want to clip the base photograph, that is the model herself, so that she fits exclusively inside the frame. So I'll go ahead and click on the woman layer to make it active. I'll switch to the lasso tool, which you can get by pressing the L key. And you want to press the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and keep that key down so that you can create a polygonal selection outline. And click in the bottom right corner and then click in the top right corner like so. Click over here in the top left corner. You don't have to be all that careful up here at the top of the image, but you do have to be pretty careful down here at the bottom. So click in the bottom left corner and then go ahead and click right about over here someplace and release the Alt or Option key in order to complete the selection outline. Then, with the woman layer selected, drop down to the Add Layer icon at the bottom of the Layers panel and click on it. And that'll clip her inside of that frame. Now let's go back to that frame layer and turn the layer mask on by shift-clicking on the layer mask thumbnail. And you can see I've done a fair amount of work in terms of masking away the interior of this layer, but it's not tough work. If you Alt-click or Option-click on the layer mask to view it by itself, you can see that it's just a bunch of sloppy brushwork that I applied here. So I'll Alt or Option-click again in order to restore that layer mask. Now, the fill layer should not exceed outside the frame either. That is the purple color of her shirt. So I'll go ahead and zoom in on this bottom right corner. And I'll zoom pretty far in. And then I'll scroll down a list, twirl back open that color fills layer, scroll all the way down to the shirt layer to make it active. You could apply a layer mask if you want to mask this area away, but it's not really tough stuff. So why not just go ahead and erase it using the eraser tool? I'll right-click inside the image window so you can see, once again, the hardness is cranked up to 100%. The size is 45 pixels in my case. You can go your own way, of course. And if I bring back the brushes panel, I've reduced the spacing value to 10%, which is definitely going to help us out. Now I'll go ahead and hide that panel, and I'll click right about there, and then I'll shift-click lower down, and I'll shift-click again. And by virtue of the fact that I'm shift-clicking, I'm connecting my click points with straight segments. All right, now I'll click there and shift-click right about there, and I'm going to have to do a fair amount of shift-clicking to make my way all the way over because, after all, I'm zoomed way in. Something you want to note here is notice that I'm not clicking around here because that would make a big mess of things. I'm positioning my circular brush cursor right next to the frame outline. Now I'll press Control-0 or Command-0 on the Mac in order to zoom out from my image, and I'll press the F key a couple of times in order to switch to the full screen mode and zoom on in, and you can see this high saturation, high contrast Warhol effect. More automated than ever, thanks to the multi-layer power of Photoshop. All right, so it's all very well and good to come up with one treatment, but Warhol himself would have never stopped there. He would have created 2 or perhaps 3 different treatments, or more likely than not, he would have also created treatments 4, 5, and 6. And that's exactly what we'll be doing next week. I'll show you how to create all 6 of these treatments inside of Photoshop. Deeks Techniques, each and every week. Keep watching. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deeks Techniques. Now we're just 2 days away from Valentine's Day with all of its romance and bitter disappointment. And who can think of a better way to celebrate Valentine's Day than to create a sextet of you and your loved one rendered as classic Andy Warhol-like silkscreen / serigraph variations. And we'll be doing so in Photoshop. So we'll take last week's effect and we'll create 2 variations on it. First of all, we'll start with these classic Marilyn colors and this out-of-register hair. And then we'll pull off something Warhol never dreamed of with these radiant highlights inside the woman's face. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, I'll start things off with this establishing shot of all the variations, which I just find to be helpful at the outset. We're going to start with this one at the bottom, which is this one here. I call it Variation 1C. And it's the one that features the yellow hair out of registration with the other colors. So we'll start things off with the variation that we created in the previous movie. And notice that I have this collection of colors on the swatches layer. And these are the colors that we'll use in the image. Now, this turns out to be the most time-consuming part of creating one of these Warhol effects, is choosing the colors in the first place, because it involves a lot of experimentation. But I can offer you this advice. Keep your palette garish, high contrast, and small. Notice I have just 5 colors at work here. So what I'm going to do here, in order to apply these colors, is twirl open the Color Fills group down here at the bottom of the stack, and then click on the Eyes layer to make it active. Start things off by tapping the D key in order to establish the default colors, and then press Control-Shift-Backspace, or Command-Option-Delete on the Mac, in order to fill the eyes with the background color, which is white. Now press the I key to switch to the eyedropper tool, which you can also get at this location inside of the toolbox. Make sure that Sample is set this time to all layers, as by default, and then click on this shade of red, the very first color swatch, in order to lift it. And now, click on the Eyelids layer in order to make it active, and press Shift-Alt-Backspace, or Shift-Option-Delete on the Mac, in order to fill the eyelids with red. Then do the very same thing with the Lips layer. Select the layer and then press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete. Now click on the Shirt layer to make it active, and then click in the shade of green to lift it, and press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete on the Mac. Now go ahead and scroll down to the Face layer to make it active. Click on this hot pink, and press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete to fill the face with this garish color. Now click on the background to make it active. Click in the dark blue swatch to make it the foreground color. And this time you don't have to press the Shift key because we're not respecting any transparency associated with this layer because it doesn't have any. So just press Alt-Backspace or Option-Delete on the Mac in order to fill the entire background with that blue. Now select the hair layer. And we want to make it that classic Marilyn hair Warhol yellow. So click in the yellow color swatch to lift it and then press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete to make the hair yellow. Never mind the fact that it makes no sense that these dark shadows would be associated with blonde hair. That kind of ironic contrast was typical of Warhol's work. But we do want to offset these colors so they appear out of registration. Also, of course, indicative of his artwork. So go ahead and press the Control and Shift keys, or Command and Shift on the Mac, And with those keys down, press the right arrow key 3 times in a row and press the up arrow key once. Now, if you wanted to save off this effect, most likely what you do is scroll back up the list, turn off the swatches panel, and then save out this variation, not using the save command, but rather by choosing save as, so you don't ruin your original image. Now let's check out the next variation, which I call 1A. It features these colorized shadows as well as these radiant highlights. I'll go ahead and switch over to the base image. This time I've applied the colors in advance because I figure you get the idea where that's concerned by now. If you're working along with me, make sure the woman layer is selected. And then what I want to do is I want to fill that layer with the same color that I'm using for the hair, which is this guy right there. So I'll go ahead and click inside that second to last swatch, and then I'll check out the HSB values here inside the color panel. They're 0, 50, and 75 respectively. With that in mind, I'll drop down to the FX icon at the bottom of the panel and choose Color Overlay. That goes ahead and fills in the entire layer with red by default. So I'll go ahead and click on the color swatch. And I'll dial in those values I lifted a moment ago, which are 0 for the hue value, 50 for saturation, and then 75 for brightness. And now I'll click OK. We want to use this color in order to brighten up the darkest shadows inside of this layer. So go ahead and change the blend mode from normal to screen. That ends up brightening up not only the layer that we're working on, but all of the clipped layers as well. And that includes the black and white and levels adjustment layers, as well as that texture layer. And what that means is when all of those layers are combined together, we end up getting this over brightening effect. If you want to drop that out, go ahead and click on blending options here on the left side of the dialog box and turn on this checkbox, blend interior effects as group. And that's going to settle down everything outside of the shadows. Now, you may wonder, well, why is it that this shade of red, which is assigned to the hair, when assigned to the shadows, ends up producing a darker color? And that's because we have the blend mode set to multiply, so it's actually burning into itself. If I were to change the blend mode to darken, we'd end up getting that flat color right against the hair, which is actually a pretty cool effect, which is why I'm showing it to you, but not the one that I'm looking for. So I'll go ahead and switch back to multiply. I actually want to darken up this effect. So I'll switch back to color overlay, click on this red color swatch, and I'll dial in a darker brightness value, 50% this time around. I want it to be infused with a little more color, so I'll take the saturation value up to 100%. Then I'll click OK to accept the color, and I'll click OK inside the layer style dialog box to accept the effect. Now to create those luminescent highlights. And we're going to lift those from the base image using the calculations command. The first thing you need to do is Alt-click or Option-click on the eyeball in front of the photographic layer, and then turn off the effects as well, so that we end up seeing that base image. Also, Shift-click on the layer mask thumbnail to turn it off. Now go up to the Image menu and choose the Calculations command, which allows you to blend two channels together. You want both of these layer options to be set to merged, so that you're lifting your mask from the merge version of the composition. Then change the second channel option here to blue and turn on the invert checkbox. And then finally, change the blending setting, which is the blend mode, to difference in order to create this psychedelic effect here. Now click OK. And what you've done is you've created a new channel here inside the Channels panel. So go ahead and switch over to the panel, scroll down the list, and you can go ahead and rename this channel Highlights if you like, because that's what it's going to be. Doesn't look like it so far, but it will as soon as you press Control-I or Command-I on the Mac in order to invert the image. Next, press Control-L or Command-L on the Mac to bring up the Levels dialog box and change that black point value, the first value under the histogram, to 100. And that's it. Then click OK. Now we need to convert these highlights to a layer. And you do that by pressing the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and clicking on the Highlights channel. And that goes ahead and converts what's white in the channel to a selection and what's black to deselection. Now click on the very top item here, RGB, to switch back to the composite image. Return to the Layers panel, Alt-click or Option-click on the eye in front of the photographic layer in order to turn on all the layers in the image. Then turn on the effects and Shift-click on the layer mask to turn it back on. Now I want you to twirl open the Color Fills group right here. And go ahead and click on the eyes layer at the top of the stack in order to make it active, and then press Control-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N in order to bring up the new layer dialog box. Let's go ahead and call this layer Highlights and click OK. And I want to fill the selection with the background color. So I'll go ahead and click with my eyedropper tool, either in the background or in that final color swatch as I'm doing here, in order to lift that pale yellow. And then press Alt Backspace or Option Delete to fill the selection with that color. And now press Control D or Command D on the Mac to deselect the image. I don't want to see the highlights in front of the hair, so I'll go ahead and grab the hair layer and move it to the top of the group by pressing Control-Shift right bracket or Command-Shift right bracket on the Mac. Or if your layer thumbnails aren't this large and you can see more layers at a time, you can just go ahead and drag it up to the top of this group. And then finally, we don't need those white eyes this time around, so just go ahead and turn off the eyes layer. And then I'll go ahead and turn off the swatches layer as well. And press the F key a couple of times in order to switch to the full screen mode and zoom on in as well. And here's the final version of this particular variation with the colorized shadows and the radiant, almost metallic highlights. Now, Warhol himself would have never stopped at 2 variations. He would have created at least 6. That way he'd make more money. He said so himself many, many times, which after all is what makes him the consummate American artist. Which is why if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, speaking of money, we'll take this guy, also captured by Ollie of the Fotolia image library, and we'll make not just 1, not just 2, check this one out, I just love this one, but 3 different Warhol-inspired variations. If you're waiting for next week's free movie, I'll show you how to combine all of your variations, whether Warhol-inspired or otherwise, into a single document so every image is precisely aligned. Deeks Techniques, each and every week. Keep watching. In this movie, we're going to take on some advanced Warhol variations, specifically those that are applied to the male model. So we'll start off with this guy up here, and you can see that all the variations on the male portrait include the specialized backgrounds, in large part because compositionally he takes up a smaller area of the square. And then we'll move along to this lower left guy, in which we've got some textural variations. And then finally, we'll take on the lower right guy, in which the colorized shadows don't interact in the least with the rest of the colors. Let's go ahead and switch over to this guy. This is the first of the variations, just very large so you can see what's going on. I'll go ahead and switch over to the base version of this composition. You can see that I've gone ahead and created some swatches just so you can get a sense for the color palette. But of course, I've already assigned those swatches in advance. Now, what I could do is take this final swatch, this dull shade of green, and apply it uniformly to the background by pressing the I key to switch to the eyedropper tool and then clicking in that shade of green. And then I'll press Alt Backspace or Option Delete on the Mac in order to fill the background with that color. You can see that that leaves us with a pretty weak composition overall. So I'm going to press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac in order to undo that change. What I want is a more textured background like this one right here. I created it by painting with the Wacom tablet, both with the brush tool and with the eraser tool. Let me show you how it can look if you don't have a pressure-sensitive stylus. You can still end up getting some pretty decent results. So I'll go ahead and turn off this layer and create a new one by pressing Control-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N on the Mac. And I'll just call this Painterly Back or something like that, and click OK. And now grab the brush tool, which you can get by pressing the B key. And I'm just going to dial in bright red by changing the hue value to 0 degrees and the other 2 values to 100%. And I'll right-click inside the image window in order to bring up my brush panel. And notice this guy right here, round, fan, stiff, thin bristles. That's the brush that I used. So go ahead and click on it in order to select it. It's one of the bristle brushes that came along recently inside Photoshop. And then you want to bring up the brush panel, which you can also get by choosing brush from the window menu. And these are the values that I dialed in. And you can see them all listed inside this flat fan layer. But I changed bristles to 20%. Then I took length up to 100%. I changed the thickness value to 30%. increased the stiffness value to 100% and left the angle value set to 0. And you can see that you get this little preview here. Now you can hide the brushes panel. Increase the size of your brush just by pressing the right bracket key a few times. And then brush inside the image window like so. We're not trying to create anything, obviously. We're not even trying to get gestural inside of this image. All you're trying to do is just fill in most of the areas with brush strokes and leave a bunch of holes as well. Not too big of holes typically because you don't want to call attention to them necessarily. You just want to provide some painterly texture inside of this background. And then if you care to, you can get expressive as well. But if you decide to get expressive, you should do so with the eraser tool. That is, you should erase expressive holes inside your painted layer. So to get a sense of what I mean, go ahead and select the eraser tool. And I'll right-click inside the image window. And notice that the hardness value is set to 100%. That's what you want. And I've got my size value cranked down to 6 pixels. If you were working with a pressure-sensitive tablet, you would want a higher value. But because I'm not, I'm going with this value here. And then I'll just go ahead and paint some fairly awkward-looking brush strokes because it's hard to do anything decent with a mouse. But we're just looking for some gestural stuff here and there. And we want some variation too, so you'd probably want to press the left bracket key a few times in order to reduce the size of the brush, and then paint in a few thinner holes as well. And the nice thing about working with holes like this, as opposed to painting with red and then painting with white, is now I can change the color to anything I like. So if I press the I key to switch back to the eyedropper tool and click inside that dull green color swatch, and then I can press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete to fill this layer, complete with all of its holes, with green. Anyway, I don't want to use that layer because I created it using a mouse. I'll go ahead and turn on this layer that I created with a pressure-sensitive tablet instead, which looks a heck of a lot better. I'll select the layer, and then I'll press Shift-Alt-Backspace or Shift-Option-Delete on the Mac to fill it with green. I also decided to colorize the shadows in this image. So I'll go ahead and click on the portrait layer, which is called Man. Then I'll drop down to the FX icon, and I'll choose Color Overlay. Go ahead and click on the color swatch and dial in hue value of 260, saturation value of 100%, and then a brightness value of 50%. Click OK. Then change the blend mode to screen so that you're brightening up those shadows. Switch to blending options over here in the left-hand list. And we want to get rid of those extra highlights outside of the shadows. And you can do that by turning on Blend Interior Effects as group. Then click OK to accept the effect. You may be saying to me, we already saw that in the previous movie, if you watched the previous movie. But the reason I'm showing it to you again, albeit under different circumstances, is because I forgot to apply the color to the frame effect, which means that we've got a black frame combined with this dark blue ink, if you will. And if this were actually silkscreen or a lithograph, then all of this stuff would be on the same plate. And so it would have gotten inked the same way, which means what I need to do is right-click on this FX icon, associate with the Man layer, and choose Copy Layer Style. That'll get both the effect and the fact that I turned on that Blend Interior Effects checkbox. Now I'll right-click on the Frame layer, and because I'm working with the small screen, I get this 2-column menu. I'll go ahead and choose Paste Layer Style in order to paste the blue onto the frame so that we have better continuity where this composition is concerned. So that's that effect. I'll go ahead and switch over to the next one, in which we have this wonderful textural interaction going on, as well as these red paint strokes coming into the guy's face. Here's how I achieve this effect. We'll start inside of this version of the composition here. This time around, my color palette includes just 4 swatches, as you see here. So here's how I achieved the texture effect. First thing I did was scroll up to the frame layer here, click on it to select it, and press Ctrl-J or Command-J on the Mac to make a copy of it. Now I want to move it to the bottom of the stack, so I'll press Ctrl-Shift left bracket or Command-Shift left bracket on the Mac to move it behind the background. Now I'll shift-click on the layer mask thumbnail in order to turn it off. And I'll click on the flat fan layer to make it active. And then I'll go ahead and change its blend mode to multiply, so I end up with this interaction here. I decided I wanted to infuse this background frame with some color, so I clicked on it to make it active. Then click on the FX icon and choose Color Overlay once again. I'll click on the red color swatch to bring up the color picker dialog box. And then I'll reduce the saturation value to 50% and take the brightness value down to 75%. Click OK. And now change the blend mode from normal to overlay just to get a sense of how things would look. That wasn't quite the effect I was looking for, so I tried out hard light instead. and ended up with this much better effect here. Now I'll click OK. So the idea is that by starting with this painterly background, you can blend it with any kind of textural effect you like. Then I started playing around with my other color fills, and I came across an unexpected effect here. I'll go ahead and twirl open the color fills group, click on the face layer, and change the blend mode from normal to overlay, and I ended up with what I have to admit is this happy accident here. The final effect is this one here, in which we create these highly saturated shadows that don't interact at all with the other colors. And I'll show you exactly how that works in the very next movie. In this movie, I'll show you how to create the final Warhol variation on the male portrait, which includes some additional depth in the background, as well as these colored but opaque shadows. Go ahead and switch over to this base version of the composition, which includes this very small palette of colors shown in the upper left corner of the image. I'll go ahead and scroll down to the bottom of the Layers panel, and I'll click on the background layer to make it active. And then I'll press the I key to switch to my eyedropper tool, make sure that Sample is set to all layers up here in the Control panel, and then click in the yellow swatch, the second one from the left. Then press Alt Backspace or Option Delete in order to fill the background with yellow. Now we have a couple of different colors going on in the background. Now I'll click on the flat fan layer to make it active, and in order to give it just a little bit of painterly depth, I'll click on the FX icon and I'll choose Inner Shadow, and that'll bring up these default settings here. The black shadow doesn't look right at all, so I'll click on the color swatch in order to bring up the color picker dialog box, and then I'll move my eyedropper cursor out into the image window and click on that medium green background in order to lift it. And even though that's the same shade of green that's already at work in the background, because the blend mode is set to multiply by default, we end up getting these darker interactions. Now I'll click OK in order to accept that effect, and I'll increase the opacity value to 100%. A distance value of 5 pixels is fine. You want the choke to be set to 0%. Tab to the size value and press Shift up arrow in order to increase it to 15 pixels, and then I'll click OK. And you can see that it appears as if the yellow, even though it's in back of the green layer, is a little bit raised. Now I'll click on the man layer in order to make it active, and I want to infuse these shadows with red. I'll try out that same approach that I showed you in the past couple of movies. I'll click on the FX icon at the bottom of the panel and choose Color Overlay. And I do want this exact shade of red. That is to say, if I click on the color swatch, the hue value is set to 0 degrees, the saturation is 100%, and the brightness is 100% as well. Go ahead and click OK, and I'll change the blend mode, as in the past, to screen. And that ends up producing too bright of an effect outside of the shadows, as you can see here. So I'll click on Blending Options over in the left-hand list, and then I'll turn on Blend Interior Effects as Group, which has done the trick in the past. However, if I click OK in order to accept that change, you can see that we get these, well, I would say unfortunate interactions in the white areas of the hair, as well as in the white portions of the eyes. Now, you may or may not find that to be exactly what you're looking for. If not, and you want the shadows to be uniformly this bright shade of red throughout, here's what you do. Go ahead and turn off the effects that are assigned to the man layer, then click on the Color Fills group in order to make it active. Press and hold the Alt key or the Option key on the Mac and click the black-white circle at the bottom of the Layers panel and choose Solid Color. Then go ahead and name this layer White and click OK. Inside the Color Picker dialog box, just go ahead and drag to the upper left corner of the color field in order to fill the layer with white and click OK once again. Now scroll up to the top of the list and turn off the swatches layer so that we're seeing just the shadows. That is to say, the shadows associated with the male model, as well as, if I press Ctrl-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out slightly, those associated with the framing effect as well. With nothing but the shadows visible, switch over to the Channels panel, and let's convert those shadows to a selection outline by pressing the Control key or the Command key on the Mac and clicking on RGB. And that'll go ahead and select the white regions and deselect the black ones. That's the opposite of the effect we want. So go up to the Select menu and choose the Inverse command, or you can press Ctrl-Shift-I or Command-Shift-I on the Mac. Now switch back to the Layers panel and turn off the frame layer, then scroll down the list and turn off that man layer as well as the layer of white. Now scroll back up to the top of the list and click on the swatches layer, and we're going to create a new layer to house our opaque shadows by pressing Ctrl-Shift-N or Command-Shift-N on the Mac. And then call this layer Color Outlines and click OK. Now let's go ahead and lift that shade of red, and the easiest way to do that is to bring back the swatches for a moment. I still have my eyedropper active, so I'll click in that final swatch in order to load the bright red as a foreground color. Turn off the swatches layer, make sure the color outlines layer is still selected and that you still have a selection outline at work, and then press Alt Backspace or Option Delete on the Mac in order to fill the selection with red. Now if you press Control D or Command D on the Mac, you can see that we are left with these absolutely opaque shadows. Press the F key a couple of times in order to fill the screen with the image, and I'll zoom in as well. And this is the final version of the composition, complete with the multicolor and slight depth in the background, as well as these bright opaque shadows and texture patterns here inside Photoshop. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deke's Techniques. This week, I'm going to show you how to take those Andy Warhol-style variations that we've been creating over the past couple of weeks, and we're going to combine all 6 of them into a single Photoshop document so that every single image is precisely aligned and not a single pixel is clipped, and the canvas is precisely the size it needs to be. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. We'll start things off in Photoshop's companion program, Bridge. So if you're working inside Photoshop, go up to the File menu and choose Browse in Bridge. And then if you're working along with me, you want to direct the bridge to the contents of today's folder. And you'll find all 6 of the Warhol variations, starting with Portrait Shot 1A and ending with Portrait Shot 2C. Go ahead and click on the first and shift-click on the last in order to select all 6. And then go up to the Tools menu, choose Photoshop, and choose Load Files into Photoshop Layers. Now, bear in mind that these are all multi-layered images. We don't want all those layers, and the great thing about Load Files into Photoshop Layers is that it goes ahead and flattens each one of the files and then assigns it to an independent layer. And it looks like this. Bridge will automatically switch you over to Photoshop, and you'll see some activity over here inside the Layers panel, as Photoshop flattens each one of the layered files and then adds it to the larger variation composition. So we now have a total of 6 layers, if you scroll through them here inside the Layers panel once again, that are all lumped directly on top of each other. We need to give ourselves more room to work. So go up to the Image menu and choose the Canvas Size command. And then you want to turn the relative checkbox off and switch from pixels or whatever unit of measurement you're working in to %. Now we know we have a total of 6 variations, so we need to make room for them, that is 3 wide and 2 deep. And you do that by changing the width value to 300% and then tab your way to the height value and change it to 200%. And that translates to 3 by 2, which is a total of 6. Now go ahead and click in the upper left corner of the anchor matrix so that we'll expand the canvas to the right as well as down, and then click OK. And we end up with this effect here. Now you want to press Ctrl-0 or Command-0 on the Mac to zoom out, and press Ctrl-A or Command-A on the Mac to select the entire image. Now go to the Layers panel and click on Portrait Shot number 1B, which should be the second layer down, and switch to the Move tool, which you can also get by pressing the V key. Now the great thing about the Move tool is when you have a selection outline active, you can use these align icons up here in the options bar in order to align a layer to the selection. So in our case, what we want to do is click on this final align icon, which is align right edges, and that goes ahead and moves the second portrait shot to the far right. Now click on the next layer down, again inside the Layers panel, and go up to the options bar and click on this guy right there, align bottom edges, in order to scoot that third variation to the bottom, and then click on align horizontal centers in order to center it inside the canvas. Now you want to move to the next image down, which you can do by clicking on it, or you can press Alt left bracket. That would be Option left bracket on the Mac, just in case you're looking for a keyboard shortcut. And for this guy, all you need to do is click this icon, align horizontal centers, in order to move him into the proper position. Both of the next layers need to be moved to the bottom. So click on one and then shift click on the other. So these are the bottom two layers in a stack, which are called portrait shots 2B and 2C. And then go up to the options bar and click on this icon, align bottom edges. That's going to look like it's not necessarily working, but it's moving them both into a coincident location. So in other words, they're both on top of each other down here in the lower left corner of the canvas. Then click on the final layer, the one at the bottom of the stack, 2C, and go up to the options bar again and click Align Right Edges to move it to the proper position. We're done. Press Control-D or Command-D on the Mac. I'll press Shift-F to switch to the full screen mode, and then I'll go ahead and zoom in, scroll down a little bit as well. And those are my final 6 variations, combined and perfectly aligned, using a combination of Bridge working together with Photoshop. Now, in case it's not obvious, you can use this trick for combining any forms of variations or different photographs, as long as each one of the images is exactly the same size. I know. Now I tell you. If you're waiting for next week's free video, we're going to switch over to Illustrator, and I'll show you how to create this pattern of size-changing, color-changing inset circles. Perfect for your next shower curtain. Deeks techniques each and every week. Keep watching. Hey gang, this is Deke McClelland. Welcome to Deeks Techniques. This week, really exciting stuff. I'm going to show you how to create this pattern of size-changing, color-changing inset circles inside Illustrator. And we'll be doing so by blending groups, whole groups of circles. And then we'll group those blends, and then we'll turn around and blend those groups of blended groups, which I know sounds like so much nonsense, but it's totally possible and really powerful as well. Now, if you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, and by the way, if you're not, how come? Because you can get 7 days free right now by going to lynda.com/Deke. But if you are, then you have access to an exercise file that contains a single circle. But it got me thinking, why not show you how to create that file for yourself if you want to? So all you got to do is create an artboard that measures 612 points wide by 420 points tall. And then you want to create this little circle here that's 43 1/3 points in both directions, and then set its center point, which you can do from the transform panel, to x44, y42, also in points. And once you've done that, you can follow along with me. Here, let me show you exactly how it works. All right, here's that pattern of size-changing circles, just so you can see it on screen. I'm going to switch over to this document, which contains one and only one circle, the base circle for the design. And I'll go ahead and click on it with the black arrow tool to select it. Notice that my fill is active here inside the color panel, so every color I apply will affect the fill. I'm going to switch over to the swatches panel by going to the window menu and choosing the swatches command. And then I'll apply one of the default swatches, which is C20, M0, Y100, K0, which colors the circle a kind of chartreuse. Now double-click at a scale tool in order to bring up the scale dialog box. Set the uniform value to 90% and then click on the copy button in order to create a smaller copy of the circle. And let's go ahead and fill that guy with white. Then double-click on the scale tool again, or because it's selected, you can just press the Enter key on a PC or the Return key on a Mac and dial in a uniform value of 68% and click on the copy button. And let's go ahead and fill that guy with that same shade of chartreuse that we applied earlier. Now I'm going to switch back to the black arrow tool, which you can get by pressing the V key, and I'm going to click on the outermost circle to select it. Now I ended up experimenting with exactly where to put this next circle inside the document, but now that we know, we're just going to dial in an exact value by double-clicking on the black arrow tool at the top of the toolbox and dialing in a horizontal value, 524 points, and then change the vertical value to 0 points. And if you turn on the preview checkbox, you'll see that that moves the circle over to this location here. Next, click the copy button to create a copy of the shape. And let's fill this one with this next shade of green, which is C50, M0, Y100, K0, which as you can see is definitely giving us more of a grass green. Now let's switch back to the scale tool, double click on it to bring up the scale dialog box. And I'll go ahead and move it over so that we can see what we're doing. Change the uniform value to 50% and then click on the copy button and go ahead and fill that circle with white. and then double-click on the Scale tool again to bring up the Scale dialog box, and dial in a uniform value of 62% and click on the Copy button, and go ahead and fill that one with that same shade of green we applied a moment ago. Now I'm going to press the V key to switch to my black arrow tool. I'll click on the outermost circle to select it, and I'll go ahead and press the Enter key or the Return key on the Mac in order to bring up the Move dialog box. Change the horizontal value to 0 points this time around, and dial in a vertical value of 336 points, and that'll move the circle down to the lower right corner. Then go ahead and click on the Copy button to create a copy of it, and let's fill this guy with this shade of green, the next one over, C75M0Y100K0, in order to assign a kind of emerald green. Then double-click on the Scale tool, because we need to create a couple more copies here, and dial in a uniform value of 20% this time. We're going for a very small circle, and then click the Copy button. Go ahead and fill that guy with white. Then double-click on the Scale tool again, dial in a uniform value of 36%, and click Copy. And go ahead and fill this guy with that darker shade of green like so. Now we need to create a shape in the bottom left corner, and it's going to be that same shape that you see in the top right corner. Press the V key to go ahead and select the black arrow tool, marquee the shapes, and then go up to the Object menu and choose the Group command to group them together. And with the black arrow tool selected, press the Enter key or the Return key on a Mac and dial in a horizontal value of negative 524 points this time. Leave the vertical value set to 336 points, and you'll move that shape into alignment with the circles above it and to the right. Now click on the Copy button in order to make that final set of circles. Now we need to group these other guys. So go ahead and marquee these shapes, press Ctrl-G or Command-G on the Mac to group them, and marquee these shapes as well, and press Ctrl-G or Command-G on the Mac to group them as well. Now it's time to blend the shapes. We'll start by blending in rows. So I'll go ahead and marquee these two groups at the top of the document, and then go to the Object menu, choose Blend, and choose Make. Notice you also have this keyboard shortcut of Ctrl-Alt-B or Command-Option-B on the Mac, and that goes ahead and blends between the two groups like so. Now the circles are a little tight. We'll take care of that in a moment. Now what you want to do is select the bottom two shapes, and really the easiest way to do that is to go up to the Select menu and just choose Inverse. And that'll reverse the selection so the guys at the bottom are now active. And I'll use that keyboard shortcut, Ctrl-Alt-B or Command-Option-B on the Mac to create a blend between those two shapes. Now press Ctrl-A or Command-A on the Mac in order to select all the shapes. And the easiest way to edit a blend is to double-click on the Blend tool, which is located toward the bottom of the toolbox. And that'll bring up the Blend Options dialog box. Go ahead and turn on the Preview checkbox and change spacing to specified steps. You'll probably see a default value of 11. Go ahead and select that value and press the down arrow key to reduce it to 10, and that gives us better spaced circles. Then click OK. Now, what I'd like to be able to do at this point is blend between the two blends by going up to the Object menu, choosing Blend, and then choosing Make. But if you do that, you're just going to connect the upper right group of circles to the lower left group, and you're going to end up with this pattern of circles in the shape of a Z. We don't want those, so I'll press Ctrl-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to undo that change. What we need to do instead is break up the blends. You don't really want to lose these blends long-term necessarily. You might want to come back to them. You might want to go ahead and make a copy of this circles layer just by going to the Layers panel flyout menu and choosing Duplicate Circles in order to make a copy there. And now I'll double-click on an empty portion of that layer to bring up the Layer Options dialog box. And I'll call this one Final Blend, and then I'll change its color to gold. And then I'll click OK. And now you want to turn off your bottom circles layer so you don't make a mess of it. And then, with all the objects on this Final Blend layer selected, go up to the Object menu and choose the Expand command. And that'll bring up this dialog box. Both Object and Fill should be selected. Assuming they are, go ahead and click OK. And what you now have is two groups of circles that you can blend between. And all you do to create that blend is once again press the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-Alt-B or Command-Option-B on the Mac. And then finally, we want to loosen up the vertical circles a little bit. So double-click on the blend tool icon in the toolbox to bring up the blend options dialog box. Turn on the preview checkbox, change spacing to specified steps. This time Illustrator has automatically selected 7 steps. I'll go ahead and click inside that value and press the down arrow key to reduce the number of steps to 6, at which point we get much better spaced circles. And now I'll click OK to accept that change, and I'll press Ctrl-Shift-A or Command-Shift-A on the Mac to deselect the artwork. And that's how you create a simple but elegant pattern of size and color changing circles here inside Illustrator. If you're a member of the lynda.com online training library, then I have a follow-up movie in which I show you how to take our pattern of green circles and warm them up like so. Now, this isn't just a matter of modifying the colors and allowing the blends to update automatically because, after all, we have this region of static green circles in the middle. But I'll show you exactly how it works. If you're waiting for next week's free movies, why then we're going to take another look at op art, this time inside of Illustrator. I'll show you how to create this effect here, which is going to drive the editors nuts because it's going to create all kinds of compression problems because I refuse to stop moving the page. I'll also show you how to create this awesome effect. Deeks Techniques, each and every week. Keep watching.